Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take your comprehensive source material, all the articles, notes, and research, and turn it into a knowledge blueprint.
We want to give you that critical shortcut to being truly well-informed.
And today, wow, today we are tackling a topic that it really challenges the fundamental story of health and fitness.
It really does. I mean, it's the story most of us have internalized since we were kids. We're going straight for the established dogma of what it even means to be healthy.
For decades, we've been told a very, very simple story, and it really boils down to three words: body fat is the enemy.
That's the one.
We're judged by the scale, by our BMI, and the goal of health is just presented as simple subtraction. You know, if you lose weight, you're succeeding.
Right. And if your BMI is high, you're automatically filed under unhealthy. It seems so
That's
straightforward.
the three. Right.
Not simple at all. And according to the research you shared with us, that fat-centric way of thinking, it's more than just simplistic. It's a profound misdirection.
A misdirection. How so?
It's led modern medicine and, public health policy down this investigative dead end. We've been completely fixated on the visible symptom, the fat, and we've completely missed the root cause.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core thesis here is a true paradigm shift, and I think it's critical for everyone listening.
It is.
The real problem isn't being over-fat. The research suggests the problem is fundamentally metabolic, and it's rooted in being, well, under-muscled.
Exactly. And that realization forces us to reclassify muscle entirely.
So we have to stop seeing it as just, what, an accessory, something for movement or for aesthetics.
Precisely. The sources are absolutely clear on this. Muscle should be treated as the organ of longevity.
The organ of longevity, that's a powerful phrase.
It is. And if you look at the landscape of chronic disease today, we see this epidemic of dysfunction. The material suggests that the failure isn't starting in the adipose tissue. It's starting in the muscle.
So wait a minute, we've been focusing on the wrong organ the entire time.
It certainly appears that way. The severity of this misdiagnosis in contemporary public health is really hard to overstate.
Okay.
Skeletal muscle is arguably the single most important metabolic organ in the human body. It is the central processing unit for how we handle energy.
Central processing unit.
And when that central unit is weak or inactive or just dysfunctional, the entire system starts to collapse.
And what does that systemic collapse actually look like? What happens when the metabolic control center goes offline?
When muscle stops doing its job efficiently, the material indicates that everything downstream begins to break. And this is the critical connection. We're talking about the cascading diseases that we normally treat as separate and distinct things. So this includes obesity, absolutely, but also type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and critically, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, which, as we'll get into, are increasingly seen as a metabolic failure that has reached the brain.
Wow, so all of these huge, pervasive, chronic health issues.
According to this research, they don't start with fat accumulation. They start when the muscle fails to manage energy effectively.
That sets the context, and I mean, it raises the stakes incredibly high. To really grasp this shift, we have to move beyond that high school biology view of muscle.
You're right, that view of it as just contracting tissue. We have to appreciate its comprehensive systemic role.
We need to understand the sheer scale of its operation and the complexity of its communication system.
That's the necessary shift in perspective.
So let's move into our second section. Muscle, the unrecognized metabolic control center. And let's start with scale, because here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The sources highlight that most people view muscle mechanically, strength, lifting, posture, which, as we're learning, massively underestimates its role.
And the data completely supports that massive underestimation. For the average person, skeletal muscle makes up roughly 40% of total body weight. 40. Just think about that volume. It is by far the largest single organ system we have. It outweighs the skin, the liver, every other major organ.
When you put it like that the largest single component of our body is a metabolically active organ we can consciously train, the implication is it's profound.
It is. A system this large, managing this sheer volume of energy demand and signaling, it cannot fail quietly.
Right. It's too big to fail without major consequences.
Exactly. if your largest metabolic engine starts to sputter because of neglect or inactivity, the resulting symptoms are never going to be small or isolated.
The consequences of its decline are systemic.
They're felt everywhere, from your cardiovascular system all the way to your brain function.
So if it's the control center, what gives it this central metabolic authority? What makes it so important?
Well, the defining characteristics are really twofold. First, as we just said, it's sheer systemic influence. It's a metabolic and hormonal organ that influences everything from your immunity to your blood flow.
Okay. And the second?
The second, and this is crucially important for intervention, is its unique controllability.
Wait, let me stop you there. We talk about training the heart or supporting the liver, but you're saying muscle is fundamentally different.
Fundamentally different because we have a direct, conscious lever on its function.
What do you mean by that?
Muscle is the only major organ system you can consciously command and control. You can't send a direct neurological command to your pancreas to, improve its insulin production.
Right. Or tell your liver to filter toxins more efficiently.
You can't. But you can contract your muscles. Every single time you move, every time you lift a weight or walk up a flight of stairs, or even just stand up.
You're sending a signal.
You're sending a critical, potent message that directly changes how your body handles energy, how it regulates inflammation, and how it allocates resources. It's the ultimate metabolic regulator that you hold the keys to.
That completely reframes physical activity. It's not just about burning calories. It's about sending a command signal to the largest organ in your body.
That is the core takeaway. Now, let's dive into two of its primary functions, starting with the one that's most relevant to diet and energy balance. Its role in handling carbohydrates.
Ah, yes. The sources use a fantastic analogy for this one. They call it the glucose suitcase.
It's the perfect analogy. Muscle stores carbohydrates in the form of glycogen. When you eat, especially complex carbs, the primary storage destination for that fuel is this enormous muscle suitcase.
So muscle is designed to be the main storage facility for incoming energy.
That's its job.
And the size of the suitcase and critically, whether it's empty or full, that completely dictates how efficiently your body processes the next meal.
Precisely. When you engage in activity, or more specifically resistance training, you burn through or deplete that glycogen.
You empty the suitcase.
You empty the suitcase. And this depletion makes the muscle receptive, highly insulin sensitive, and ready to efficiently absorb and process incoming nutrients. The system works perfectly.
But what if we're inactive? What if we don't empty it?
Inactivity means the suitcase stays packed. It's full. So if you consume carbohydrates while your muscle suitcase is already full, the incoming glucose has nowhere useful to go.
The muscle receptors are just closed off. They don't need the fuel.
They don't. They're full. And that's when the overflow happens, right?
Which spills into the bloodstream.
It spills into the bloodstream. Yeah. And that sustained elevation of glucose is the moment metabolic problems begin.
And we see that elevated blood sugar and immediately blame the carbs.
We do. We blame the type or the amount of carbohydrates we just ate. But the underlying issue, the research suggests, is the muscle's inability to store that glucose.
A muscle failed.
A muscle failed to utilize the fuel, and that failure breaks the systemic energy management.
So the solution isn't necessarily just to radically restrict carbs.
No.
It's to address the utilization failure of the body's largest glucose sink.
That's the key nuance. You have to earn the right to utilize that fuel efficiently by making sure the storage capacity is ready.
Which leads directly to the muscle's second massive function you mentioned.
Metabolic flexibility.
We hear this term a lot, but let's define it clearly in the context of muscle health.
Metabolic flexibility is, simply put, the ability of healthy muscle cells to efficiently switch between fuel sources.
Okay, so switching between carbs and fat.
Specifically, preferring to burn fat at rest and glucose during activity. When you are just sitting here talking, your healthy, efficient muscle should be using your stored body fat as its primary fuel.
And that's the metabolic state where maintaining your energy balance just feels effortless.
Effortless, exactly.
So when muscle quality declines, what exactly breaks in that fuel switching mechanism?
That metabolic flexibility just disappears. The quality of the muscle, which we'll detail later, it determines the efficiency of its internal machinery, specifically the mitochondria.
The little powerhouses in the cell.
Right. And when that machinery is compromised, the muscle loses its ability to efficiently switch to fat burning. Instead, the body gets locked into a chronic state of glucose dependence, even when it's at rest.
That sounds like the ultimate inefficiency. It's like having this gigantic overflowing tank of readily available fuel, our abundant fat stores, but the engine is designed so it can only sip from the tiny emergency reserve of circulating glucose.
That is a perfect description. Muscle health dictates the metabolic programming of the entire body. The state of your muscle determines whether you are metabolically adaptable, able to switch fuels seamlessly, or metabolically brittle.
Brittle, meaning you need constant inputs of glucose just to function.
Constantly.
If muscle is, talking to the rest of the body about energy status and fuel preference, how does that communication actually happen?
That's a great question.
It leads us directly into our third major section, which is all about the crucial role of signaling molecules.
This is where we move from the mechanical and storage roles of muscle to its function as an active endocrine gland.
So it's not just a passive sack of fibers.
Not at all. It's constantly transmitting instructions.
Let's introduce myokines. These sound like the hormonal emails the muscle is sending out to every other critical organ: the brain, bones, fat cells.
That's exactly right. Myokines are potent signaling molecules that are released into the bloodstream when muscle contracts.
So the contraction is the trigger.
The contraction is the trigger. They are the direct mechanism by which exercise delivers benefits to organs other than the muscle itself.
So when someone says exercise is good for your brain or exercise helps your bones, the myokines are the actual molecular messengers making that happen.
Absolutely. Think of them as the chemical mediators of systemic resilience. The research details several protective roles. Let's start with the brain.
Okay.
Certain myokines directly support brain health. For instance, some may help upregulate something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
BDNF, I've heard of that. It's like fertilizer for the brain, isn't it?
That's a great way to put it. It supports the growth of new neurons, improves cognitive function, and it suggests a protective link against neurodegenerative decline by reducing stress and improving metabolic function in the brain itself.
That's a direct, measurable link between doing a bicep curl and having a better memory.
It is. Secondly, they enhance bone density.
How does that work?
Well, muscle contraction pulls on the bone structure. The myokines released in response to that mechanical stress act as hormonal signals, essentially telling the bones, the forces on this structure are high, you need to reinforce the matrix.
So it keeps the skeleton strong?
It helps maintain skeletal integrity, which is vital for preventing falls and maintaining long-term mobility, especially as we get older.
And you mentioned inflammation, which seems to be the common denominator in almost all chronic disease. How do myokines address that?
This is one of their most critical roles. A dysfunctional inactive muscle can sometimes contribute to chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation.
Right, it's just sort of smoldering in the background.
Right, exactly. Conversely, a contracting muscle releases myokines that actively mediate and suppress that inflammation. They act as anti-inflammatory agents throughout the body, providing essential physiological resilience.
Can we get a little more specific there? Are these myokines just passively reducing inflammation, or are they actively fighting it?
They are very active players. For example, some sources mention myokines like interleukin-6 or IL-6, which, when it's released during exercise, can act as an immune modulator.
Okay.
It triggers the release of other anti-inflammatory compounds. So in essence, resistance training doesn't just make you stronger. It provides a systemic dose of anti-inflammatory medicine that travels via your bloodstream.
It's like your own internal pharmacy.
In a way, yes.
All right.
This just reinforces that core concept that muscle is central, not optional.
Mm-hmm.
If you are improving muscle function through contraction, you are inherently improving your cardiovascular, hormonal, and immune function all at the same time.
And the sources also connect this mechanical signal to the vascular system itself, improving circulation and the health of the blood vessels.
Yes, through improved endothelial function.
The endothelium, that's the inner lining of the blood vessels, right?
It's the delicate inner lining. When we use our muscles, the sheer increase in blood flow causes a mechanical stress called shear stress on the vessel walls.
Mm-hmm.
Myokines are released in response to this, and they support the health and flexibility of that endothelium. A healthy endothelium means your vessels dilate easily, blood flow is smooth, and your blood pressure is better regulated.
So strengthening your muscle directly contributes to protecting your heart and reducing your risk of stroke.
Directly.
This moves the argument completely past aesthetics and into true physiological management, which it sets the stage perfectly for our next topic, the diet side of things.
Right.
We've established that the root cause is muscle dysfunction, not fat itself. So Section 4 focuses on the carbohydrate conundrum.
And this section provides some necessary nuance that often gets completely obscured by the polarizing noise of diet culture.
The distinction is crucial. The sources say carbohydrates are not inherently bad. They're energy. They're vital fuel for high-intensity activity.
Correct.
The problem, as we hinted at earlier, is the context. The context of their consumption relative to the functionality of your muscle.
Precisely. When your carbohydrate consumption chronically exceeds your body's activity levels, that is, when the energy input is greater than the muscle's demand or its capacity to use that glucose, they become counterproductive.
So they're not used efficiently by the largest organ designed for their disposal?
And that is exactly where the metabolic trap is set.
So let's detail that trap. What exactly happens in the body when the muscle is chronically inactive and that suitcase is always full?
If the muscle isn't being regularly trained, stressed, and depleted, the suitcase, as you said, stays full. Incoming carbs have no useful productive destination.
The body has to deal with it somehow.
It does. The body senses the elevated glucose, and because high blood sugar is acutely toxic, the body releases insulin to deal with it. This maintains a state where the body is locked into burning that glucose because it has to clear it from the bloodstream.
And what is the immediate consequence of elevated insulin on our ability to manage our body fat?
It suppresses fat oxidation. Insulin is inherently an anti-fat burning hormone. It signals that fuel is abundant and needs to be stored, not burned.
So metabolic flexibility is completely lost.
Completely. And over time, the body enters this vicious cycle. Because the glucose is constantly present and insulin is constantly elevated, the body becomes more and more dependent on carbohydrates for immediate fuel,
While at the same time,
simultaneously becoming extremely efficient at storing every single caloric surplus as fat.
this is a huge reframing. The reliance on carbs, the cravings for sugar, that's a symptom of a broken metabolic system,
It is
not the cause of the system breaking down.
It is the consequence of muscle failure. The crux of the matter is that this is not a carbohydrate problem. It is a muscle utilization problem.
So if the muscle is healthy and trained,
If the muscle is highly efficient and trained, it clears glucose efficiently. The body's metabolism is robust enough to handle the fuel intake, restore blood sugar levels quickly, and then naturally return to burning fat between meals.
but inactive muscle.
Inactive, inefficient muscle forces chronic glucose dependence, leading to insulin resistance and all those associated downstream issues.
It's just fascinating how the sources tie what's popularly seen as a nutritional crisis entirely back to a lack of mechanical activity.
It's the mechanical signal that sets the metabolic stage. You can adhere to the most rigorous, low-carb diet available, but if that massive 40% metabolic sink, the muscle is not trained and functional, you will always be fighting an uphill battle against insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction.
Let's look at the consequences of losing that battle. Section V details the downward spiral, muscle failure, and chronic disease. The sources suggest that this cluster of modern diseases, it's not random, it follows a predictable pathological pattern, and it originates in the quality of the muscle tissue.
The pattern is rooted in a shift in the quality of the tissue itself. So you have to define the difference between healthy and unhealthy muscle at a structural and a cellular level.
And the memorable phrase used here, which is both accurate and frankly a little shocking, is that unhealthy muscle begins to resemble a marbled steak rather than a lean fillet.
That analogy is highly useful because it describes a very real process: intramuscular fat infiltration.
Okay, what is that exactly?
Healthy muscle is lean, dense, and it's packed with functional mitochondria. But when muscle becomes unhealthy, fat starts to literally infiltrate the tissue itself. It fills the spaces between the muscle fibers and even within the fibers themselves.
And that fat accumulation disrupts the internal machinery of the muscle cell.
Yes, specifically the mitochondrial function.
So the mitochondria, the cell's powerhouses, are essentially being choked off.
Exactly. They are suffocated by fat. And when mitochondria are compromised, their ability to utilize energy declines sharply. Their capacity to switch to fat burning is lost. And critically, insulin resistance develops right there, locally, in the muscle tissue.
It's that internal hidden fat that's the starting gun for the whole cascade.
That's it.
So the disease sequence begins when this compromised muscle loses its ability to effectively clear and store glucose. What's the linear path of dysfunction that's laid out in the research?
The sequence is pretty clear. First, metabolic syndrome emerges.
The prediabetes stage.
Right. This is the stage when muscle can no longer handle glucose properly, leading to that cluster of risk factors: high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and excess visceral fat storage. This is the body's first systemic warning.
And what follows that initial warning?
Type 2 diabetes is the next logical step. This develops as that failure of glucose disposal becomes chronic, and the elevated blood sugar becomes toxic. It overwhelms the system and eventually forces the pancreas to just give up.
And after that,
Following that, cardiovascular disease accelerates. The combination of chronic inflammation, poor lipid handling, and insulin resistance from the muscle failure. It just speeds up vascular damage throughout the entire circulatory system.
and the connection to cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, this is so often treated as a disease that's isolated in the brain. But the sources link it right back to this metabolic failure.
Increasingly, yes. Alzheimer's is viewed as the ultimate manifestation of this systemic metabolic dysfunction. Researchers are even calling it type 3 diabetes.
Type 3 meaning insulin resistance in the brain.
Specifically, insulin resistance within the brain tissue itself. The ability of the brain to properly clear waste, utilize glucose, and maintain neuronal health is compromised when the whole body's energy management system, starting with the muscle, fails.
And what's so vital here is that these conditions are frequently treated as separate things by different specialists.
They are, yet they share the exact same upstream cause: persistent, poor muscle health.
And if we look at this pattern of decline in the real world, the weakening, the loss of function, it's so often just labeled as normal aging.
But the sources challenge that notion directly.
They do.
They deliver a sharp correction. Aging is frequently blamed for sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, and systemic metabolic decline. But aging itself is often the accelerant, not the true driver.
So what is the true driver?
The real damage, the research suggests, comes from repeated periods of inactivity.
And what counts as a period of inactivity? Is that just weeks or months being sedentary?
That includes the sedentary lifestyle, of course, but also acute events, an illness, an injury, even a stressful work period that forces someone off their feet for a while.
And muscle is lost very quickly when it's not used.
Extremely rapidly, far faster than it is built. And once that loss begins, the spiral accelerates.
How so?
Reduced muscle mass means movement requires exponentially more effort. So your energy declines further and your activity decreases even more. The downward spiral is fully established, independent of your chronological age.
So, the message is that the weakness and frailty we see are largely due to disuse atrophy, not just the passage of time.
Absolutely. The sources state this emphatically. This process is not inevitable. It is preventable, and in many cases, it's treatable by rebuilding the functionality and density of that muscle organ.
If you want to successfully attack chronic disease, you have to look 20 years upstream.
Not just at the current symptoms, you have to intervene at the organ of longevity.
Now, if muscle quality is the single most important metric, why on earth are we still using tools that fail to measure it? That's our next section. Why traditional metrics are lying to you.
These traditional tools fail because they're external or purely correlational. They don't look at internal metabolic function. Let's start with the worst offender, BMI.
BMI. It's still used everywhere, in clinics, insurance assessments, everywhere.
It is, and the research just dismisses it entirely as a useful measure of individual metabolic health. It is simply a height-to-weight ratio.
So it can't distinguish between a highly muscled rugby player and
an inactive person carrying the same weight and fat. Its only utility is maybe for large-scale population screening.
But for the individual listener,
it tells you virtually nothing about whether your muscle is functioning as a lean fillet or a marbled steak.
What about body fat percentage? That seems more precise since it's actually measuring fat directly.
It is better, but it still has a critical flaw. Total body fat percentage measures the percentage of fat mass relative to your total weight, but it does not account for the location of that fat.
Oh, okay.
You can have a relatively low total body fat percentage, but if that fat is deeply wedged within your muscle fibers, that intramuscular fat, or wrapped around your internal organs as visceral fat, you are still highly dysfunctional and at severe risk.
I see. So the issue isn't just how much fat, but where it is placed. If the fat is infiltrating the machinery of the muscle, that's the real problem.
That is the problem. The critical factor we should be looking at is muscle quality. This is what truly matters, far more than muscle mass or total weight alone.
And muscle quality is defined as?
The inverse relationship between functional muscle tissue and the amount of fat that has infiltrated it, that marbling.
This perfectly explains the phenomenon we see so often, being thin but metabolically unhealthy, the so-called TOFI thin outside, fat inside.
Exactly. A person can appear thin, even frail, and yet have high levels of intramuscular fat, rendering their large muscle organ inefficient, insulin-resistant, and metabolically broken.
And the opposite can be true.
Conversely, a person who carries extrasubcutaneous fat, the visible fat under the skin, but maintains dense, healthy, low intramuscular fat muscle can remain surprisingly metabolically robust.
The research cites intramuscular fat as one of the strongest predictors of dysfunction.
One of the strongest, earliest predictors of insulin resistance and long-term dysfunction.
Okay, so if that internal marbling is the strongest predictor, but we can't see it or feel it, how do we measure it accurately? We can't step on a standard scale.
This is where traditional assessment tools fall completely short. The sources explain that the only truly reliable way to assess muscle quality is through advanced imaging techniques. We're talking about highly specific, detailed scans,
Like what?
like an MRI, a CT scan, or high-resolution ultrasound.
And the gold standard among those?
MRI remains the gold standard because it provides superior contrast and detail. It reveals what traditional impedance scales or even DEXA scans never will. The precise density, volume, and degree of fatty infiltration in the muscle tissue.
It gives you a literal image of how marbled your muscle organ is.
A literal image.
Okay, but this is where the rubber meets the road. MRI scans are expensive. They're completely impractical for daily or even quarterly monitoring for the average person.
Right.
We know the goal is to improve muscle quality, but we can't regularly measure it. So how do we translate that knowledge into simple, effective action?
That's a crucial transition. If we know what the real metric is, muscle quality, we can shift our actions to impact that quality directly. And the sources provide a refreshingly simple answer.
Okay,
It focuses on two non-negotiable levers that are directly under your control.
let's move to Section 7, the two non-negotiables for optimal muscle health. It seems the solution is straightforward, even if it's been obscured by the complexity of diet fads.
The good news is that the foundational intervention is low-tech and high-impact. It comes down to two simple, powerful levers: the signal and the maintenance.
Let's start with the signal, resistance training. Why is this so much more powerful metabolically speaking than just going for a brisk walk or doing steady-state cardio?
A walk is great for cardiovascular health, don't get me wrong, but resistance training is described as the most powerful metabolic signal you can give your body. It doesn't send the same intensity of command.
What command is that?
Resistance training is the direct mechanical language that tells the body, this tissue is essential, it is under high stress, and you must allocate resources immediately to preserve, strengthen, and densify it.
And that signal directly addresses muscle quality.
Directly, by improving density, demanding glycogen be utilized, and emptying that critical glucose suitcase.
And for someone listening who is worried this means they have to basically live in the gym, what's the minimum effective dose that's cited in the material?
For people aiming for optimal health and longevity, rather than competitive bodybuilding, the sources suggest that 3 full-body sessions per week are generally sufficient.
The goal isn't exhaustion then.
The goal is not exhaustion or spending 2 hours in the gym. The goal is achieving progressive effort.
What does that progressive effort look like in a practical sense? How does the average person know they are sending that potent signal?
The key metric for providing the necessary stimulus is training close to failure. The source suggests leaving only 1 or 2 repetitions left in reserve, or RIR.
1 or 2 reps in the tank.
Exactly. That is the intensity threshold required to force muscle adaptation, protein synthesis, and metabolic remodeling.
And if you can easily do 20 reps of an exercise,
You are simply maintaining, not building or improving metabolic function. The body won't prioritize resources for a tissue that is rarely challenged.
so it's about making the last few reps difficult, but not so difficult that you sacrifice form or risk an injury.
Exactly. And the sources clarify this isn't about aesthetics or ego lifting. It is a purely functional and metabolic imperative.
It's just the language the body understands?
Training near failure is simply the intensity required to send the signal that muscle tissue is essential and worth preserving. That directly drives the metabolic improvements we've been talking about, like efficient glucose disposal and the release of those protective myokines.
That's the signal, the mechanical command. Now for the maintenance, reevaluating protein intake. This challenges the standard dietary advice most people follow.
It absolutely does. The research is blunt. The current recommended dietary allowance, the RDA for protein, is functionally irrelevant if your goal is optimal health, muscle quality, and longevity.
Why is the RDA so far off the mark?
Because the RDA was designed solely to prevent clinical deficiency, diseases like kwashiorkor. It's a minimum survival standard developed decades ago that ensures you won't die from a lack of protein.
It was never designed to help you thrive.
Never. It was never designed to support optimal muscle synthesis, maximize the metabolic capacity of the muscle organ, or counteract the effects of aging and chronic inactivity.
So, if the RDA is irrelevant for our purposes, what is the optimal intake suggested for longevity?
The sources suggest a significantly more appropriate intake range of roughly 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Okay, and for those of us who think in pounds,
For the majority of listeners, that translates to about zero point 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of your target body weight.
and that's a much higher number than most people are hitting.
It is. And this higher range is necessary because muscle maintenance is constant, and it requires a high volume of structural material to maintain that massive 40% organ.
And this need only increases with age, which sounds a little counterintuitive. Why does an older person often need more protein than a younger person?
This is a critical technical point that addresses the complexity of aging. It's a phenomenon called anabolic resistance.
Anabolic resistance.
As we age, our muscles develop a kind of deafness to the signals that trigger growth and repair. It means our muscles require a larger, more potent stimulus to get the same response,
Meaning more protein.
meaning a higher threshold of protein and amino acids, specifically leucine,
Yeah.
in any given meal to initiate muscle protein synthesis compared to a younger person.
So a 20-year-old might synthesize muscle effectively with 20 grams of protein in a meal, but a 70-year-old might need 35 grams just to get the same basic response.
That's a perfect example. The required dose to break through that anabolic resistance increases.
And protein needs also go up during periods of inactivity.
Yes, like recovering from an illness or injury, because muscle breakdown accelerates when the signal to use it is absent. Protein intake becomes even more essential structural maintenance during those times.
Let's focus on the timing element mentioned in the sources, specifically the first meal of the day, because this is where many people fail to hit those targets.
This is a vital tactical detail. After an overnight fast, your body is naturally in a state of net protein breakdown. Consuming a substantial amount of protein right away is essential to reverse that catabolism.
And the sources highlight the importance of consuming how much?
30 to 50 grams of high-quality protein in that first meal.
30 to 50 grams of protein at breakfast is far more than most people consume. That's not a yogurt and a slice of toast.
Not at all. That's eggs, cottage cheese, or a substantial protein shake. It is a deliberate, targeted intervention.
And what does that intervention do?
This quantity of protein sends a critical, powerful signal that shifts the body immediately from a catabolic or breakdown state to an anabolic rebuilding state. You are giving your largest metabolic organ the materials it needs right when it is most receptive.
So skipping protein at breakfast is essentially missing the best opportunity to tell your body time to rebuild and repair that vital organ.
And instead, you're allowing catabolism to continue for several more hours. This affirmation needs to be constantly reinforced. Protein is not a bodybuilding trick. It is essential structural and metabolic maintenance for the organ of longevity, and the elderly or inactive person needs it even more than the athlete.
This all brings us to our final section. Beyond fitness, a responsibility. The implications of this research are enormous. They move beyond individual body composition goals and into societal and long-term quality of life.
The research issues a very serious warning. If we continue on the current trajectory, where health is measured by flawed metrics like BMI and where chronic inactivity remains the norm,
Then what happens?
the current obesity problem, which is often viewed as a fat storage issue, will be replaced by a far worse, deeper crisis.
And that is
Widespread frailty.
frailty, the loss of physical and cognitive function that robs people of independence and forces reliance on others.
Yes, and the costs of this frailty crisis will dwarf the costs of the current obesity epidemic.
So the call to action has to extend to healthcare providers and policymakers.
It must. Healthcare must move decisively beyond BMI as a meaningful diagnostic tool. Dietary guidelines must be updated to reflect the needs for optimal function and resilience, especially regarding protein.
Not just minimum survival standards.
Exactly. Muscle health deserves the same critical attention, screening, and resources as cardiovascular care.
And you mentioned the personal, emotional implications of this research, specifically regarding our approach to our aging family members.
This is perhaps the most profound part of the deep dive. The weakness, the loss of mobility, the diminished confidence, and the loss of independence we witness in our aging loved ones. It's almost universally labeled as just old age.
But the sources frame it differently.
Very differently. It is largely preventable and treatable muscle loss, or sarcopenia, driven by inactivity and undernutrition.
So helping an aging parent or relative maintain their strength isn't just a kindness.
It's an active intervention in their long-term dignity. It's one of the most meaningful interventions possible.
Because muscle supports so much more than just movement.
It supports mobility, which supports confidence, which supports dignity. When a person loses the fundamental strength to stand up from a toilet unassisted, or open a jar, or lift a grandchild, they lose a piece of their autonomy.
And their engagement with the world.
Maintaining that organ of longevity is literally supporting their independence for as long as possible. It is a responsibility of care.
This entire deep dive has been an exercise in simplifying complexity and giving us a clear target: muscle quality. Let's finish with the bottom line summary, a simple four-step chain reaction outlined in the Material for Longevity.
It really is the foundation of long-term health, and it simplifies the entire complex metabolic process.
Step 1.
Strong, active muscle improves glucose control and utilization.
Step 2.
Improved glucose control restores metabolic flexibility and fat burning.
Step 3.
Restored fat burning lowers systemic inflammation and disease risk across the board.
And the final step.
Lower disease risk leads to a longer, more functional, and better life.
The message couldn't be clearer. This is not about aesthetics or chasing a number on the scale or adhering to transient diet fads. It is about building and protecting the biological capacity to stay capable, functional, and independent well into old age.
Build muscle. Keep it strong. Protect it with high-quality protein and progressive stress. Everything else, your metabolism, your immunity, your long-term health, depends on it.
That brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We've established that muscle quality, that internal measurement of intramuscular fat, is the single strongest predictor of metabolic health. We know the gold standard measurement in MRI is impractical, but the required actions resistance training, close to failure, and high protein intake are entirely feasible. So if capability is the true metric of a lean, functional fillet, what are 3 daily behaviors beyond your actual gym time that serve as non-negotiable, tangible proof that you are actively protecting and prioritizing your organ of longevity? Think about that measure of functional capability as you plan your nutritional and activity habits this week.